Taylor Swift is the Time Person of the Year, and this is another historic and groundbreaking moment in a series of historic and groundbreaking moments that have been happening for who I would say is arguably the most famous person in the world, hence she is Times Person of the Year, in 2023. We are topping it all off with this wonderful profile written by Sam Lansky, a brilliant journalist and writer whose work I really admire, and today I am going to be delving deep into and giving a close reading of this article because, I'm the Swiftologist. I got insights to give, I have opinions to share, and I was truly salivating, frothing at the mouth to get into this because there are so many interesting things that are included in this article. We haven't had direct access to Taylor's mind as told by someone else, aka a journalist, hasn't been given access like this since maybe the end of 2015. So this is a pretty groundbreaking moment. The last long form article that she did where she talked at length was with Rolling Stone in 2019 when Lover came out, but that was a directly printed word for word interview. Her words weren't taken out of context or interpreted by someone else and quoted back to her without her control or final say, which is what happens when you submit to writing a profile. I don't think that Taylor Swift submits to being a profile in the same way that someone else with less leverage and power would. I mean, she has no reason to sit for a profile. It could be helpful to her, but it's not 100% necessary to continue her meteoric rise to the stardom that she has at the moment. I personally thought that we wouldn't be seeing another mediation of her through another person's perspective or lens for a long time, if ever, so I was very pleasantly surprised to see this. I do, however, think that there is more than a modicum of a Taylor Swift spin that has been put on many of the answers through this article, and there are moments in which I do wish that the journalist Sam Lansky, who is brilliant and whose work I really respect, there are moments in which I wish that he had pushed further, but I totally understand why maybe he didn't or wasn't able to. And I'm going to get into all of that as we do a close reading of this article. And for a little bit of background, context, and knowledge, I am a writer and a journalist. I was a working journalist for about 2 years, and now I am a journalist online. I make YouTube videos about pop culture, primarily about Taylor Swift. I would say that I'm a subject matter expert at this point. And you know what? The duality of a Swiftie. I can go from talking about how being a billionaire is bad to talking about how this is the best interview I've ever had in my life the next day. I mean, I contain multitudes. Also, check out my shirt, A Legend Must Weather Many Storms. Isn't that very fitting for today? I think that it is. And if you like the conversation that we're having today on this channel, I invite you to come and check out Evolution of a Snake. This is pretty much all that we do on our Taylor Swift podcast. It is the premier resource for everything you need to know about Taylor Swift. We go through her entire life and career in minute detail, and we will be doing an extremely thorough breakdown of this article as well. I can't wait to bounce off Madeline and talk about this and have discussions. We always learn something new from each other every time we talk about it, so make sure to check out the Evolution of a Snake. That episode will be out very soon. And come to our Patreon, patreon.com/reptologist for weekly episodes and so much fun. Access to a Discord where we have filtered and constructive conversations about the nature of celebrity, pop culture, music, etc., etc. Before we get into the meat and bones of the meal, why don't we look at the pictures? The pictures. I mean, come on. This is in different areas. I have been begging and pleading to see the forehead. I've been like, wellness check on the forehead, 5150 on the bangs. We need to see the forehead. Where is the forehead? Can we get the damn forehead? And here it is. I actually loved the additional photographs for this shoot a lot more than the actual photos they chose for the cover. This close-up shot of her with that really intense eye makeup is everything to me. And they really made her new messy wave that she's been going on. They've really made that look good there. So I was super happy to see that. I love the photo of her balancing the guitar. I think it's very, it's giving. It's serving. She's also definitely Easter egging for rep. This is a very Reputation-inspired shoot with the all black, the severity, the servage of it all. I love the portraits of her in black and white. The editorial direction, this really reminds me of like a combination of the Bleach Ella photo shoot with those tight close-ups, the glossy red lip, the interesting styling, and I think the 2019 Vogue shoot for Lover too. The black and white where she was wearing the suit, very much inspired by The Man. I'm getting a lot of that in this shoot too, and I just think she looks incredible. Now, in terms of the actual covers, my favorite one is either the cat or the close-up. The one with the armpits flashing the camera, I don't love that. And I think that that's the main one that's hitting the newsstands. I mean, to each their own. But, I'm always here for a cat making an appearance. That's very Taylor Swift coded. I love the one of her looking away dreamily. It's really giving Wonderland. Overall, this is an excellent shoot, the likes of which we haven't had in a very long time. So I am supremely pleased. Yes, we are literally doing a close reading. Buckle in. So Sam Lansky is quite a prolific entertainment journalist. I think he's been writing about pop girls and pop divas for a long time. I went searching for his bylines. I found some interesting stuff in New York Magazine. He was also the ghostwriter of Britney Spears' memoir, The Woman in Me. There were 3 different people that worked on it, and I believe that he was the guy that really got it over the line, to my understanding. So it's not surprising to me that Taylor chose a sympathetic gay to talk to. And something that I liked from a journalistic perspective throughout this article is his focus on narrative building and telling a story. And I think that when you're talking to Taylor Swift, as I always say, it's more important to pick up on what she's not saying than what she's directly and overtly saying to you. And I think that interviewing her or profiling her is such a challenge because she does bamboozle you. And we'll get into this as we go through. Sam Lansky definitely got bamboozled by her and was basking in her light. But I think that because she is so charismatic and effervescent, and because there's such a machine behind her as well, it can feel difficult to ask her, questions that maybe she doesn't want to answer. Ask hard questions. My overall, I'd say, criticism of this article, if I were to deliver one, would be that it was kind of a softball. Everything was very glowing. It was very gratuitous. And I suppose that has to be the case because she is receiving an honor and an accolade. But, whenever we get Taylor on the mic, I'm always like, can we go a little bit further? But she is an expert at crafting a narrative. I think even if you put the most pitbull investigative reporter in front of her, she would charm them into submission and they would come out saying, I'm a Swiftie. That's just the way it is. So Sam begins the article by sharing a story that Taylor shared with him about when she was supposed to open for Kenny Chesney. And this was kind of at the turn of her career when she was really breaking into superstardom, actually way before that she had actually broken into superstardom. She was just kind of getting a chance, and she thought that opening for this big country artist was going to really push her career to new heights and give her something she hadn't had before. And unfortunately, because there was an alcohol sponsor at the tour, she wasn't able to participate anymore, and she was devastated and super upset. But Kenny Chesney wrote her a check in the mail for a lot of money. She was able to pay for her tour buses and pay for her band bonuses, and she said that it was enough money to fuel her dreams. And his reflection on the story that she shared is very interesting. He said he was struck by how satisfying the story is. There are high stakes, there are details vivid and sensory, there's a twist that flips the action on its head, and there's a happy ending for its hero. It takes her only about 30 seconds to recount this, but those 30 seconds contain an entire narrative world. And I think immediately we have 2 or even 3 of the kind of main poles of Taylor's public persona and of her personality and her character that come out straight away through this anecdote that she shares with him. She loves to be the underdog. She's always positioning herself as someone that you need to root for, the anti-hero, if you will. She has a very clear sense of what is right and wrong, and she is very specifically guided by her moral principles, and she tries to be good wherever she can. The impulse and animus to be good is something that really drives her in life, whether, for good or bad reasons. We've seen her expound on that in Miss Americana and talk about how being a people pleaser actually is not something that has always worked well for her, but being kind to people and being nice and being easy to work with is something that is very important to her. The hero's journey is something that Taylor has definitely been playing into a lot, especially as the lore building behind her career has gotten more and more fascinating and intricate. So he says that she has a preternatural skill for finding the story and that her anecdote symbolizes a larger theme in her life, which is about redemption. And he casts her as a protagonist that has new happiness, not despite challenges, but because of them. And she says later on in this article that her response to fear or pain is to be defiant. And again, I think that is a very animating impulse for her and her psyche. I think it's interesting also that he says that she is seemingly unguarded in conversation, because he goes on to reflect that, well, of course she was guarded in the conversation. Of course she guided me in the direction of the Easter eggs, etc., etc. That's show business, baby. Taylor Swift is a master of practicing strategic vulnerability, telling you just enough to make you feel like you know her, but not so much that you can invade her space or her privacy. It feels like the breakthrough moment of my career happening at 33, she says, and for the first time in my life, I was mentally tough enough to take what comes with that. I was really thinking about resilience, not just redemption, as I was reading this passage, because this year for Taylor has been a lot. There have been a lot of things to celebrate, but I think that there has also been a huge amount of pushback and of things that aren't necessarily positive happening to her throughout the year. I mean, it didn't start off well with how the Eras tour was announced. This all could have gone very differently had she not handled it with the kind of quiet grace that she did. And I think that's something that she's adopted now that she hasn't had before, is this more relaxed attitude to her public persona. She has realized that no matter what she does, she's going to be perceived a certain way, and that really trying to wrestle back control of the narrative is counterproductive for her. Now, that hasn't recently been depicted very well in her outburst against Demois, although I think that was deserved. But I think there is a certain relinquishing that she has undergone, and that has given her the mental fortitude required to deal with the level of fame that she has now. What we know about 1989 was that she was behaving very aggressively and protectively because she was deeply unhappy with where she was, and I think also very frustrated by the creative process that she was going through at her record label at the time, which we will also get into later. An extremely interesting morsel that I can't wait to expand upon and unpack with you. So then Sam goes on to talk about the massive success she's had this year. I don't need to cover that with you. We both know what happened this year. But he did say that something shifted with Taylor's persona this year, and I wanted to comment on that. To discuss her movements felt like discussing politics or the weather, a language spoken so widely it needed no context. She became the main character of the world. And, you know, I've had a bit of a residual blowback from Taylor being the main character of the world. I've been able to build a whole career out of doing this, talking about her and commenting on her life and giving analysis of her music, etc. So the windfall that I have received just from a very peripheral part of her spotlight is crazy. There is a whole cottage Swift economy. She is raising the GDP in the cities that she goes to. It's a pretty miraculous and incredible phenomenon for a modern pop star, and I really don't think there's any contemporary precedent. Phoebe Bridgers says something later on when she's interviewed for this article, saying that you can't even compare this to Beatlemania or anything like that. It is completely its own thing. And I think if you watch my Taylor Mania video, I expand on that a little bit more, talking about how the pandemic and releasing so many albums, being hyper productive, and then also social media, how all of those things kind of converge together to make Taylor the monoculture. Taylor is the monoculture at the moment. That's the kind of scary thing about it, is that she's not the main force existing within a monoculture. There isn't a monoculture. Our attention span is so fragmented, and we're like paying attention to so many different things. It's hard to keep up or focus on one thing or have everybody having the same conversation. So what Sam Lansky's pointing at here, talking about how Taylor Swift is like discussing politics or the weather, she has become a fact of life. And that is a kind of fame that is extremely difficult to achieve. Sam says that it's hard to see history when you're in it, but harder still to distinguish her impact on the culture from her celebrity, which emits so much light that it can be blinding. And I think that that is so interesting, and also, you know, a little bit of a dropped thread that we could have picked up on. I mean, he had to encompass a lot and talk about a lot of things in this article, so obviously not everything was going to get a full interrogation, and this is already pretty long, but something that I would have liked to see him kind of muse on a little bit more would be, what are the impacts of her on the culture beyond just, you know, being the HBIC? How has her, you know, fandom maybe changed the tenor of conversations on social media? How has she invented a new kind of modern fandom and, for lack of a better word, weaponized her following in order to support her in her missions? I mean, it's interesting to think about Taylor Swift, the thing, rather than just Taylor Swift, the person. And when Taylor is in an interview, she wants you to focus on Taylor Swift, the person, because she's so charismatic and engaging, and she can tell a really good story. She has an eye for the story. She can sniff it out. She can tell you something really compelling. But what I think we don't have a lot of insight from her on is how she views the spectacle of her life. She says that she doesn't pay attention to it, but I think that it would definitely be well worth it to get her perspective on how this lore building, this narrative world construction, what are the kind of other side effects of that beyond just, I'm so happy that people are interested in my music? I would love to know. Sam says that Taylor is the architect and hero of the story, the protagonist and the narrator. And I think that this is something that she really wanted in the 1989 era, this ability to control the narrative and to kind of, you know, be able to exert dominance by the flick of a finger and have people discussing her in a very particular way. I think she's actually been able to accomplish a lot of control over her public image in this era of her life than she ever has before. And it's interesting that she manages to gain all of this control when she is the most nonchalant about it. I wouldn't say she's checked out from caring about how people think of her, but she's certainly less insistent that she be understood or that she explain herself. And I really like that. I think this is an incredible shift for her as an artist and a person. And I think that this was an interesting thing to pick up on, that she is both the designer, the writer, the editor, and the liver of her story. Like, she lives through all of this. And I wonder, like, about the abstraction of the Taylor Swift person, then there's Taylor Swift the thing, and then there's the character, the person that exists on the page, the person that I'm talking about, that I'm speculating about and drawing conclusions of, that thousands and millions of other people online are doing as well. It must be difficult to contain all of those versions of yourself in your head. How do you contend with having all of those things at once? And I think there is something to be said about the fact that she's not very introspective about what's going on right now, because at various moments throughout this year, I've been thinking, damn, I wonder what Taylor is really thinking about this. Like, 1989 Taylor's version outsold the original. How is she feeling about that? People are tailgating by the thousands in the stadium parking lots of her shows. How is she feeling about that? There are disasters happening at her shows overseas. How is she feeling about that? Her resounding response to kind of perfecting her craft is that she was able to do it because she's the proudest and happiest she's ever felt and the most creatively fulfilled and free that she's ever been. And I think what's so interesting here is she says, we can convolute it all we want or try to overcomplicate it, but there's only one question. She adopts a booming voice. Are you not entertained? Millennial behavior. And I think, you know, Taylor is the master of skipping over the details, you know. The story's got dust on every page. And I think that it certainly is more complicated than just, are you or are you not entertained? There are bigger conversations to have about the nature of fandom with Taylor Swift, also her position in the monoculture, her ability to control the narrative, the idea of her maybe even being an anti-competitive artist. Is she sucking up all the air in the room? These are questions that are worth answering and cannot just be answered by, are you not entertained? So remember that thread I talked about earlier where I said that there was the opportunity after he mentioned that Taylor's life could be very blinding. There was an opportunity to talk about the fandom and culture and how critics' response to her has had to evolve to accommodate the increasingly insane behavior of her fans. This was an interesting summation of who her fans are and how they behave. Her fans are singularly passionate. That is a very nice way to describe them. Not just in the venue, he's at the Eras Tour, but also online, where they analyze clues, hints, and secret messages in everything from her choreography to her costumes. Some deliberately planted, others not. Taylor Swift fans are the modern-day equivalent of those cults who would consistently have inaccurate Rapture predictions once a month, a tweet noted. Now, here is where we could have gotten into the attitude of the Swiftie, and we could have gone into the diverging perspectives on what it means to be a Swiftie. And I would say, circling that all back around to Taylor Swift, what I'm most interested in is how does she feel when she makes her life kind of a game, a playable game where she is a character that you can kind of slot yourself into and look around through her eyes and try and live her experiences and tell them to other people or tell them back to each other? That is what I really would like to know in this scenario. And I think that, you know, there have been several conversations about the fervency of her fans and the damage that they can do. I mean, there are so many critics that have suffered greatly because of just saying something that wasn't uniformly positive about her. Other celebrities who are frequently encountering cancel trains on Twitter because the Swifties have mobilized against them. There is something to be said about collective power here. What Taylor views the purpose of her fandom to be, because she doesn't really talk about the fans very much in this, which is interesting because she did at length in other interviews talk about her relationship with her fans and how important it is to feel personally connected to them. There is a sense of remove that I'm getting in this article. So then we start talking about the Eras tour. I knew this tour was harder than anything I'd ever done before, by a long shot, she said. She said that in the past she'd toured like a frat guy, which I thought was so interesting because I can't really imagine her just, you know, winging it and getting on stage and not really practicing that much beforehand. But I think that the studied learning that she's done on how to be a good, competent performer that can carry a show this long is so evident in the quality of the show. Her breath control, the way that she sings live throughout the entire show with very little assistance is super impressive. So she says that this time she started training 6 months ahead of the first show. And it's interesting to me that she had the thought from the very beginning, before the ticket fiasco even happened, that this show really had to be bigger, better, longer than anything anyone had ever done before. Not just her, because shows are really not this long in the pop world. They aren't. Her gym created a custom program for her, incorporating strength conditioning and weights. Then she said she had 3 months of dance training because she wanted to get it into her bones. I wanted to be so over-rehearsed that I could be silly with the fans and not lose my train of thought. Very smart. As she mentioned, she is not a natural when it comes to choreography, and it takes her a long time to learn it, so she really has to get it down pat. I think that this very militant approach to preparing for the Eras tour was so compelling because none of us could have predicted at the end of 2022 what this year would have in store for her. But I think that part of her skill and what makes her so impressive is that she can see it all in advance. And I would imagine that this year held some surprises for her, but also shaped up exactly the way that she wanted it to. And I think she had a lot of personal turmoil and upset that coincided with all of this professional success, and that only opened up more room and space for her to continue searching for dominance. And I think that, showing this commitment and also telling it to a reporter and putting it down on paper, showing that she cares this much about her craft and that she is earnest and that she works hard and that it doesn't just come naturally is very admirable. Okay, here is another area where I do think the reporter actually very much dropped the ball. The nonsense that happened with Ticketmaster over the process of buying tickets for the Eras tour and the insane resale market and the way that people had to go out of their way to get tickets that maybe shouldn't have cost that much or weren't able to get tickets at all. That was a train of thought that was so top of mind at the first half of this year and at the back of last year as well, that I think it deserved a more thorough interrogation. I would love to hear what Taylor's current relationship is like with Ticketmaster. They are not touched upon at all. What did Taylor make of the congressional hearings? What did she make of the Swifties showing up outside? She never said a word in support or in critique of them. So I really would have liked to have had her on the record addressing this issue. The only thing she said about the ticket process was that fans had to work really hard to get them, and she wanted to make sure that she played a show that was longer than they ever thought it would be because it makes her feel good leaving the stadium. So it seems to me that she's kind of trying to equate making the show so long and working really hard with because the ticket process was really bad. But she also just said that she started the process of working that hard way before the ticket fiasco even happened. So what is the truth? Another thing I wish was interrogated a little bit more. Carrying an economy on your back is a lot for one person. After she plays a run of shows, Taylor Swift takes a day to rest and recover. So it is a lot to carry an economy on your back as just one person. And I would imagine that the pressure of having to get up on this stage every single night, no matter what happens, is an incredibly psychologically daunting thing. But I suppose that that's just like a natural reality of what it means to be a performer at this caliber. She said, interestingly, that after the shows, she does not leave her bed except to get food and take it back to her bed and eat there. She says that it's a dream scenario, our grateful, humble queen. I can barely speak because I've been singing for 3 shows straight. Every time I take a step, my feet go crunch, crunch, crunch from dancing in heels. And she says that she's going on that stage whether she's sick, injured, heartbroken, uncomfortable, or stressed. And I think that she has been all of those things this year. Sick, injured, heartbroken, uncomfortable, and stressed. That's part of my identity as a human being now. She says, if someone buys a ticket to my show, I'm going to play it unless we have a force majeure. So that always has been part of Taylor Swift's career. I think she has never really canceled a show before the Rio shows. And again, only because of a force majeure. She has never postponed because she was sick or anything like that. She has always powered through. Talking about Anna, the young girl who passed away at the Eras tour, and not really getting into it more than this is interesting. I don't know the timeline of when this interview was conducted. It's very possible that it took place before that happened. It sounds as though, from what she's saying about not canceling unless there's a force majeure, it sounded like that hadn't happened to her at that point. Here's a passage that I really loved. As Swift whips through the era, she's not trying to update her old songs so much as she's embracing them anew. She's modeling radical self-acceptance on the world's largest stage, giving the audience a space to revisit their own joy or pain once dismissed or forgotten. I tell Swift that the show made me think of a meme that says, "You do not kill the part of you that is cringe, kill the part of you that cringes." Yes, she exclaims. Every part of you that you've ever been, every phase you've ever been through, was you working it out in that moment with the information that was available to you at the time. There's a lot that I look back at like, wow, a couple of years ago, I might have cringed at that. You should celebrate who you are now, where you're going, and where you've been. I think this is the most reflective that she is about what the Eras tour has meant to her. And when she said on stage that she was happier than she'd ever been way back when, I actually do think that had nothing to do with any man that was in her life. And I think it had everything to do with the fact that she was wholeheartedly flinging her arms open and embracing her past selves and seeing her past selves being embraced by everyone else around her. That must have been a profoundly healing experience, especially because her relationship to her own work had been so complicated by the painful taking away of it. And I think that, you know, she really did end up turning something very painful into something very beautiful. And I love to see it. She actually directly references this, and she says that there is a dramatic irony in the success of the tour. It's not lost on me that the 2 greatest catalysts for this happening were 2 horrendous things that happened to me, she says. And this is where the story takes a turn. The first was getting canceled within an inch of my life and sanity, she says plainly. Again, there is an overblowing of the actual facts of the matter of what happened there. But Sam Lansky offers an interesting defense of that later on in this piece. And the second was having my life's work taken away from me by someone who hates me. I really thought we were going to get some more Scooter Braun tea. I really wanted him to get roasted here, but I would have a feeling that there would be legal implications for her if she really started to come out the side of her neck. And really, Karma is her boyfriend, so she doesn't even need to say anything about him because the Tay Voodoo comes for the victims when it needs to. I thought it was funny that she referred to her dad, her mom, and her brother as a small family business. And I also am not surprised to hear that they all come up with some of the best ideas in her career. I think that this is extremely unusual for a family to not be involved, because it's very common for families to be involved with their child stars. It just usually doesn't end with astronomical success. It usually ends with child star going off the rails or career going into the tank or stealing money from the child. It doesn't usually end with family stays really close to each other and child does really well. So there is something very interesting and unique about the family unit that they have. So then we get into talking about the concept of the eras in general. And I think that Taylor Swift is one of the first pop stars to really be super self-referential in that sense, to specifically call back to specific eras, dress up as herself, and embrace herself wholeheartedly. A lot of people throw Madonna back at me when I say that Taylor was the first to do this. And Madonna for sure has a lot of eras, but I don't think that she has ever, prior to the Eras tour, I know she's kind of doing this on her new tour, I don't ever remember her kind of embracing, accepting, and inviting the copy-pasted versions of those past selves onto the stage with her. I know Madonna likes to update her material, etc., etc. So it was interesting to hear Taylor's reflections on having to shapeshift, and she has talked a little bit about the pressure to reiterate as a woman in the music industry before, but I had never gotten the sense that it was this much of a pain for her, or that she had done it so consciously and that she had been really trying to avoid something bad happening to her. So she says that she realized every record was actively working to try and replace me. I thought instead I'd replace myself with a new me. It's harder to hit a moving target. And I think that, Taylor is scrappy. That is a really important part of her personality. And it reminds me of a quote that she said about herself, which is that people underestimate the lengths to which I will inconvenience myself to prove a point. That truly is the Taylor Swift of it all. That is her individual neuroses that I think has made her, such an excellent communicator and also a really good shapeshifter. I had always thought of the maturing of the Taylor Swift image and brand as being something that was very natural and was just kind of her leaning into whatever she was feeling at the time. The only time that I really felt that in the first 6 albums there was a really, really concerted image shift, I suppose, was to Reputation. Here she starts reflecting on the music industry, and this is also a very interesting rumination to hear because we have only heard about her opinions on the industry through the lens of the media, talking about how the media treats celebrities, or we've heard her talking about specific people within the industry that she's mad about. Not really reflections on the music industry as a whole, but she says here that when an artist is mature enough to psychologically deal with the job, they throw you out at 29. She said that in the 90s and the 2000s, it seems like the music industry said, let's take a bunch of teenagers, throw them into the fire, and watch what happens. I can think that maybe she's addressing like Christina Aguilera, Britney Spears, that generation of pop stars, and by the time they've accumulated enough wisdom to do their jobs effectively, we'll find new teenagers. I thought that it was very interesting that she referred to 1989 as her imperial phase, because that is a terminology taken straight from Stan Twitter, and there are several moments throughout this piece that had me thinking, oh, she's way more online than we think she is. She's way more boots on the ground, in tune to what's being said than we thought. She is not sitting at home doing nothing. She's looking. She's lurking. Hi, Taylor, if you're looking. So then she talks about Snakegate, which is something that I think at this point she's going to bring up in every interview until the end of time. It really does fit into her hero's journey narrative. She loves a redemption story. She loves to be the comeback kid. She loves to be an underdog. So it just fits very perfectly into the way she likes to portray herself. And she says, make no mistake, this was a career death. My career was taken away from me. And again, I have to always push back when she says that, because I understand that her perception of it was that, and she felt that it was that way, but that was not the reality of what happened. And Sam Lansky points this out at the end of the piece, so I don't even really need to make that point. I love how she's calling Kim out by name. I mean, she's never going to let that bone go. And you know what? Down with the Kardashian empire, so please. But be my guest, Taylor. Take all the shots. You have a fully manufactured frame job and an illegally recorded phone call, which Kim Kardashian edited and then put out to tell everyone that I was a liar. That took me down psychologically to a place I've never been before. Now, see, that is what's interesting about the Snakegate situation. I think it's totally fair to say it took me down psychologically to a place I've never been before, but it's not true to say that my career was taken away from me, because no one took your career away from you. You removed yourself, as she goes on to say. I moved to a foreign country. I didn't leave the house. Also not true. I didn't leave a rental house for a year. Also not true. Sure. I was afraid to get on phone calls. I pushed away most people in my life because I didn't trust anyone anymore. I went down really, really hard. And I think that period of shedding friends and shedding skins and pushing people away obviously has imprinted on her a lot. And it feels like a lot of 2023 is a reaction to that. And make no mistake, she's taking shots at Joe here. I mean, he was part and parcel with the being cooped up at home and bored to death. That was because the heirloom turkey was with her too, don't forget. What she is correct about here is that Reputation was met with uproar and skepticism. I thought that moment of backlash was going to define me negatively for the rest of my life. That is super interesting. That is the kind of point that I am very keen to receive from the Snakegate story, rather than my career was over. To think that your career was going to be marked or tarred by this incident forever, the fake drama of I didn't leave my house for a year, is very less interesting than the real drama, which is I thought this backlash would define me for the rest of my life. So I'm kind of like, let's stop embellishing, girly. And also, it's true. Reputation is viewed as like a yes, slay queen. It is the section of the tour that I think people go most crazy for. But also, it was not met very kindly. For sure, the critics were over Taylor Swift at that point. And I think that a lot of people felt that she was being dramatic. But they couldn't see the vision. So that's their loss. And here is the big Easter egg for me. The molecular chemistry of that old label was that every creative choice I wanted to make was second guessed. I was really overthinking these albums. And this had me reflecting on the Taylor's version so much, because when we look at an album like Red, where it was pruned so much and there was so much left in the vault. When we look at something like 1989, when there were objectively incredible songs that were inexplicably left off the record, perhaps because they addressed subject matter that was too mature for her audience at the time, I have to wonder, like, how much of her creative decisions that she made was a compromise. Because I think that she had a lot of agency, but also she was subject to a lot of undue influence from this label, as she's suggesting here. So I'm thinking that, the path of least resistance a lot of the times is not to do exactly what you want, but to really just kind of take the middle ground. So I think that the Taylor's Version project, having all of these incredible songs that, again, for one reason or another that is not always clear, being left by the wayside, I wonder if, reuniting with those songs and taking back that control and being able to explain these albums fully and in her own words without the idea of how is this going to be received? What's it going to say about my story? Where is it leading to with my journey? Is it going to affect country radio? Without having those kinds of mental interruptions, I think the Taylor's Version project is such a blessing in disguise. And the idea that she was overthinking these albums, it's interesting when you compare it with the way that she's been approaching Folklore, Evermore, Midnights, because I would say, especially, let's talk about Midnight specifically so we can compare pop album to pop album. Midnights is not a better pop record than any of the overthought albums. I think perhaps maybe she's going through an era, that hyperproductive era, where she's just letting everything pass through her. I hope that eventually we're going to get back to a point where she's a little bit more selective with what she chooses to put out, a little bit more cogent in her storytelling. So she talks about how this hyperproductive phase really came about, and that was this new partnership with Universal Music. They said they would utilize everything they have as a company and give it to her, and they would be proud to put out anything that she would turn in, which makes me think, what are all the ideas that Scott Borchetta turned down? What are the things that we could have had but didn't end up having because he said no, or he vetoed the idea? What were the creative concepts that really made her heart sing that she was not able to accomplish? I would love to know. She goes on to talk about Scooter. She says that her masters were sold to someone who actively wanted them for nefarious reasons, in my opinion. I would really like to know what her opinion is. Like, what are the reasons? Is the reason he just doesn't like you and he wants to get one over on you? Because that seems to be what has been reported so far, but I would be curious to know if she thinks there was like a specific ulterior motive, because she's referenced this a couple of times and danced around it. But I mean, it wouldn't be smart to get into specifics, but that might open her up to some legal issues. But, I need to know. Mama needs to know. And this is the part always that really, makes me full Swiftie. Like, losing ownership of her music is like the one subject that really gets me so, like, anything Taylor Swift does is correct and anyone who wrongs her is my enemy. I was so knocked on my ass by the sale of my music and to whom it was sold. I was like, oh, they got me beat now. This is it. I don't know what to do. And I think that that is such a confounding feeling for her as someone who always knows what to do, who always knows what the next right step is, who has her life planned out in these 2-year intervals. To have the rug pulled out from under her like that, those two instances of it happening when she wasn't able to control what happened with Kim Kardashian and when she wasn't able to prevent the sale of her music to someone she didn't like, those things really shook her in a way that drove her to be better and be more creative. And we definitely would not be in 2023 at the Eras Tour with the Taylor's Version projects if none of that had happened, which is what's so interesting. I think that she must be secretly very grateful that all of these things happened because, every hero needs an enemy. I loved this analogy that she mentioned about the daunting nature of doing the project, and this is something that I've wanted her to expand on for so long. What is the emotional experience of going back to these songs, revisiting them, and having to do them? I'm sure that it's euphoric and that she gets to eventually own them, but I'm sure that it's also extremely upsetting and confrontational that the songs that she loves and cherishes that are little time capsules in and of themselves are forever kind of soiled by the fact that she didn't have the opportunity to own them. She says, nobody wants to redo their homework if on the way to school the wind blows your book report away. And it's so true. Who wants to start over when they've already poured their heart and soul into something? When I lose a video, do you think I want to re-edit it? No way, girl. Most of the time I say that's it. So props to her for being able to muster and summon the courage to really make this happen in such a beautiful way. There is a note by the writer that major labels have since made it more difficult for artists to re-record music, and I think that it was a very missed opportunity not to ask Taylor about that process, given that the project and the scale of the project that she's done has directly contributed to labels being more evil, more terrible about letting artists come into control of their master recordings. And given that that's something she's talked a lot about and how important it is and stressed how every artist deserves to own their own work, I'm a little bit surprised. Actually, I'm not surprised that it wasn't asked. I am sure that that was on a no-fly list of questions. Or that, Taylor's glow, the joy of being around her, makes you not want to challenge her. That's part of it too. It's not just that she's really media trained, she's also just really charismatic. And you don't want to upset the person that's being super fun and open and engaging with you. You want to keep them happy and keep them talking. And I love how she framed this strategy of re-recording her albums as a coping mechanism. It's all in how you deal with loss, she says. I respond to extreme pain with defiance. And I think that that's actually very unusual. People usually respond to extreme pain with deference or with resignation or with collapse. To respond to pain with defiance is a very type A kind of characteristic to have. She credits the success of the project and her feeling so benevolently towards it with the freedom that she's received from her label to follow her instincts. She says, if you look at what I put out since then, it's more albums in the last few years than I did in the first 15 years of my career, which begs the question of Scott Borchetta, why are you a fucking idiot? What was he preventing her from doing? Why was he keeping her on this very specific and strict 2-year album cycle schedule, overthinking every single choice, really overthinking her image shifts? What would have happened and what could the early Taylor Swift discography and career have looked like if she was given a little bit more trust and a little bit more freedom and allowed to be more experimental? I mean, really think about it. Think about the work that we could have had, the revelations that could have been shared. I mean, it all worked out for the best. You know, all's well that ends well to end up with you. But I wonder. Sam then discusses that Scooter Braun's fortunes have really changed this year. He's lost a lot of major clients and key endorsement deals, and Taylor is very diplomatic and withholding here. She does kind of like a from the side slam dunk, which is the very Taylor Swift thing to do. But she's also a little bit gracious and humble. She says, nothing is permanent. I'm very careful to be grateful for every second that I get to be doing this at this level because I've had it taken away from me before. This is one thing that I've learned. My response to anything that happens, good or bad, is to keep making things, keep making art. And I love that because I think that that is kind of the candle that has held her through all of these periods of uncertainty and doubt and the feelings of frustration. And even when she hasn't been able to fully be in control of her art, the ability to keep making it is something that is completely hers. She gets to choose when and how she does that. And I love to hear that negative influences in her life cannot stop her from doing the thing that makes her so successful, which is creating art. So I think that it also is an emotional release for her as well. I just love to hear that. And then of course she has to get her dig in. I've also learned there's no point in actually trying to quote unquote defeat your enemies. Trash takes itself out every single time. And it's like, that is a good soundbite. That is a great soundbite. And, you know, she would like us to believe that every Tay Voodoo victim is just subject to Tay Voodoo and she has had nothing to do with it. She has done a concerted number and effort to take down her enemies. Scott and Scooter are on the chopping block every day. Every single Taylor's version that comes out is a concerted effort to defeat her enemies. So I smell a little bit of BS there. I loved her telling of trying to shop the movie around to different studios and streamers, and she felt like people didn't believe in the project enough, aka they didn't want to give her enough money. She felt like they didn't have the belief that this project could really be something. And so instead she did what she has learned to do throughout the years and take a bet on herself. And her dad was the one who came up with the idea, she mentions. But I think that that is such a valuable lesson for like any young person and any young creative to take away from this, which is that a lot of the times you have to make your own luck in this world. You have to create your own opportunities. You have to be your own best advocate because not everyone is going to have your best interests at heart. And even if they do, nobody can root for you the way that you can root for yourself. And nobody can stop you from really going after what you want as long as you believe it. So then we get into the private life and the tabloid mill and the inspiration for her work, the Joe Alwyn split. It's interesting how she wasn't directly asked about it, and yet she found a way to work at it anyway, bring it up. But she is very openly talking about Travis, and that is so weird to me as a Taylor Swift fan to hear her being like so candid and open, like naming someone, talking about what it's like to be dating them. She's never been like that before. She's always had this very kind of like almost sacrosanct like rule that she will not speak on whoever she is dating, or she won't say who songs are written about, etc. And it's interesting to see that veil being broken, almost as though she learned that, you know, being cooped up with the turkey in the cage, gobble, gobble, gobble every day is not interesting. I thought it was so interesting that she doesn't know when she's being filmed at the NFL games. Like the camera's half a mile away. She can't see it. She has no idea when it's being put on her. She doesn't know if she's on the broadcast. And she said that she's just there to support Travis. She has no awareness of if she's being shown too much and pissing off a few dads, Brads, and Chads. There's that millennial queen. there's that millennial queen. I bet she still has a Tumblr account and she searches it, but not for anything to do with Taylor Swift. She's looking up relatable quotes and like recipes. Sam says that given the public interest in her dating life, isn't it noteworthy that her relationship with Kelce has played out so publicly? Basically saying, you have talked at length about not wanting to be open about your private life other than through song, so why is it happening right now? And she gives a very interesting response. She says, this all started when Travis very adorably, she's down bad, put me on blast on his podcast, which I thought was metal as hell. Okay, cringe. I know that we're embracing cringe, but cringe. We started hanging out right after that, so we actually had a significant amount of time that no one knew about, which I'm grateful for because we got to get to know each other. By the time I went to that first game, we were a couple. I think some people think that they saw our first date at that game. We would never be psychotic enough to hard launch a first date. Now, this was sad for me because the night that they debuted and everyone thought it was a first date was just the world's funniest event. I think it really goes to show that she has relinquished some control of the narrative, because that does kind of play into the old, like, misogynistic Taylor Swift is, you know, like, she gets her claws in and she gets too serious too fast. Instead of having her publicist tree come out and feed a quote to People or ET, she just let people think what they wanted to think. She didn't try to correct that. I mean, she's correcting it here, but this is after the fact. So that's kind of an impressive growth moment for me. The larger point for her is that there is nothing to hide. When you say a relationship is public, that means I'm going to see him do what he loves. We're showing up for each other. Other people are there and we don't care, she says. The opposite of that, pay attention, is you have to go to an extreme amount of effort to make sure no one knows that you're seeing someone, and we're just proud of each other. So she's implying that Joe was not proud of her. I mean, we've been new. I've been saying this in my Jover video, the first one. I said that. Okay, this is the part of the article that I don't like. This is the Taylor calculated coming out to play. The Eras Tour was one critical piece of what Swift calls a 3-part summer of feminine extravaganza: Greta Gerwig's Barbie and Beyonce's blockbuster Renaissance tour. So then she starts talking about the comparison between her and Beyonce, and this is a conversation that we need to have and that nobody wants to have in any sort of like critical or constructive way. People just want to pit them against each other, and we don't want that. So I was glad that Taylor brought it up, but I was very disheartened to see the context in which she brought it up. I think that she used a useful and a valid conversation to silence another useful and a valid conversation. So she says wonderful, glowing, beautiful things about Beyonce, and she says, clearly it's very lucrative for the media and stan culture to pit two women against each other, even when those two artists in question refuse to participate in that discussion. To Swift, the success of all three feels like an inflection point. Women have been fed the message that we naturally gravitate towards girlhood, feelings, love, breakups, analyzing those feelings, talking about them nonstop, glitter, and sequins. We've been taught that those feelings are more frivolous than the things that stereotypically gendered men gravitate towards. And what has existed since the dawn of time? A patriarchal society. What fuels a patriarchal society? Money, flow of revenue, the economy. So actually, if we're going to look at this in the most cynical way possible, feminine ideas becoming lucrative means that more female art will get made. It's extremely heartening. It's extremely heartening that I have $1 billion is kind of what she's trying to say here. It's extremely heartening that 3 women have become ultra mega rich. That's good for everyone. This is the Taylor Swift trickle-down economics, everybody. And let me just say that I know Swifties are going to take this passage, warp it and distort it and use it to shut down anyone that tries to critique Taylor Swift being a billionaire. And that is unfortunate. And I won't expand on that because I have a whole video about why Taylor Swift being a billionaire is bad that you can go and watch if you're interested. Sam also points out here that it's very interesting that Taylor seems more relaxed in the public eye, even though there's more attention on her than ever before, than less. And, you know, it really would kind of follow logic that this would frighten her to be this overexposed given what had happened to her last time. But she says, over the years I've learned I don't have the time or the bandwidth to get pressed about things that don't matter. Yeah, if I go out to dinner, there's going to be a whole chaotic situation outside the restaurant, but I still want to go to dinner with my friends. Life is short. Have adventures. Locking myself away in the house for a lot of years, I'll never get that time back. I'm more trusting now than I was 6 years ago. Joe really fed into her persecution complex at that time, and I think he was more than happy to hunker down and nurture this private love. We've talked about the victim savior complex before, and I think that he also didn't like the kerfuffle surrounding her generally. So like going out to dinner, for example, they really didn't do that very often. And to, again, eschew that part of her that is so deeply personal but also so public is to reject her entirely. You cannot be in a relationship with Taylor Swift and not be okay with being photographed and not be okay with having a chaos form everywhere you go. There is just no way that you can have a part of that and not the whole thing. Taylor Swift herself cannot extrapolate the good parts of being famous and leave away the bad parts, so why should you be able to do that as her partner? I thought this passage was very reflective and indicative of kind of like where we're at with Taylor Swift in public right now. The scene we're looking at is that she's at the premiere. She's sitting in the same row as two of her fans and the writer. They're all singing and dancing along, and they keep looking at each other and then looking at her, thinking, isn't this surreal? He writes, there are moments in the film where the cameras capture the enormous screens behind her and it feels like a funhouse of mirrors. These myriad reflections of Taylor Swift, us watching her watch herself on the screen, which is itself showing Swift's image on so many screens, the thousands of fans on screen in the stadium and here in this theater with her in the middle of it all of us wrapped and unable to look away. It's interesting that he includes Taylor in that. Taylor herself is completely captured and taken by this distortion, this abstraction of her that's on the screen. So I think that she probably has a healthy distance from her public persona. Really seems to me that she's made peace with, there's a public version of me and there's a private version of me. I don't need the public to understand the private version of me. And if they don't like the public version of me, that's not my problem either. Then she talks about reputation. There it is. She talks about revisiting it, and she calls it a goth punk moment of female rage at being gaslit by an entire structure. I think a lot of people see it and they're just like, that's snakes and strobe lighting. But the upcoming tracks on Reputation will be fire, she says. Well, prove it. Prove it. Sam putting this reflection on the re-recordings project right after the passage of her watching herself on the screen is a very good structural move, makes a lot of narrative sense. I'm collecting infinity stones, she says of the process. I'm collecting Horcruxes. It's like a mythical quest to her. She hears Gandalf's voice in her head every time she puts out a new one. For her, it is a movie now. And that is so interesting to me. It's like a little piece of her heals and a little part of the universe comes back to her whenever she releases these Taylor's versions. And so I don't watch the MCU movies because it's not my vibe. So I had to look up what an infinity stone is. And an infinity stone is something that is supposed to embody and control essential aspects of existence. So space, mind, reality, power, time, and soul. They are critical artifacts in the MCU that brings all of the movies together. So it got me thinking, I was like, what are Taylor Swift's infinity stone? What essential aspects of experience belong to Taylor Swift? And this is what I came up with. Fate, karma, destiny. I think all of those three things are linked and similar but separate, and I think she has written extensively about each of those things, and all of them have played a part in getting her to where she is today. Luck is a big part of the Taylor Swift story too. Diligence is another part. That is definitely one of her infinity stones, being a hard worker and putting in the work where it's needed. Vengeance. We can't deny there is a serpentine element. And my last one was love, because that's what it's all about for her. She's a hopeless romantic. Another prolific writer, Shonda Rhimes, offers a quote here. She says that Taylor is controlling the narrative not only in her own work, but in her life. And it used to feel like people were taking shots at her. Now it feels like she's providing the narrative, so there aren't any shots to be taken. And this is the thing. I think she's realized now that by offering things like her relationship up to the public, she's basically saying, all right, you've got nothing left to unearth or expose. You don't need to uncover this. You don't need to guess what I'm doing or how I'm feeling. It just is. And you can like it or you can lump it, and I don't really care what you do with that information. And it is interesting that she is able to have this control over the narrative, because as I mentioned, it hasn't always been so. And I think it's because as she's relied less and less on traditional mainstream media outlets, and as her fandom has grown into its own marketing engine, Taylor doesn't even really need to promote her projects anymore. She just needs to do one Instagram post and then the Swifties do the rest. And the mainstream media publications take their lead rather than Taylor having to sit for these interviews and give these phone calls and give exclusives and do photo shoots. She really has been able to bring almost all aspects of her career in-house, which means that she has a lot more control over how she's perceived than she ever has before. So this is the concluding passage, and I think probably my favorite part of the article, because it showed to me that the writer was definitely critically engaging with Taylor Swift, the thing, while he was talking to her. Swift told me a story about redemption, about rising and falling only to rise again, a hero's journey. I do not say to her in our conversation that it did not always look that way from the outside. For example, when Reputation's lead single, Look What You Made Me Do, reached #1 on the charts, and when the album sold 1.3 million copies in its first week, second only to 1989, she did not look like someone whose career had died. She looked like a superstar who was mining her personal experiences more successfully than ever. I think that figure is wrong. He says that she looks like a superstar who is mining her personal experiences more successfully than ever. And that is true commercially for sure. But I think that for Taylor, a lot of her deeming whether she's successful or not is whether she has respect in the industry. And what I will give her about Reputation is that critical respect for her was kind of at an all-time low, and people were being very cynical about the record she put out. Reputation is certainly due for a revisit. We're going to see a lot of publications retracting what they said about it before. So she looked like a superstar who was mining her personal experience as successfully as ever. I am tempted to say this, but then I think, who am I to challenge it if that's how she felt? The point is, she felt canceled. She felt as if her career had been taken from her. And of course, everybody, as we know, Taylor Swift's feelings are more important than anything else in the world. Something in her had been lost and she was grieving it. Maybe this is the real Taylor Swift effect, that she gives people, many of them women, particularly girls, who have been conditioned to accept dismissal, gaslighting, and mistreatment from a society that treats their emotions as inconsequential, permission to believe that their interior lives matter, that for your heart to break, whether it's from being kicked off a tour or by the memory of a scarf still sitting in someone's drawer or because someone else controls your life's work, it's a valid wound, and no, you're not crazy for being upset about it or for wanting your story to be told. I thought that was a beautiful conclusion to this piece that was, I think, it did a really good job at hitting almost every point that needed to be hit without actually going too deep into anything at all. But again, this was like a surface level thing. It had to encompass so many things. I think it was an excellent job, and I think that he did the best with the access that he had. It's interesting that he says, I think about saying this to her, but then I feel like maybe I shouldn't because of this long rambling reason I came to, which I guarantee you was added in hindsight. More likely, he didn't feel like challenging her on person because she's scary, because it's scary to challenge her, because she's so charismatic and effervescent that you don't really want to piss her off. She's also famous for being a little bit vindictive, and she revokes access to people that don't play the rules. So I would think that he had had a talking to by his editor. I would reckon Tree Payne had some informal conversations with the people on the editorial team and given them some guidelines, not specific questions not to ask, but, areas that were maybe not on the table. And those areas were certainly left off the table. And you know what? I can't hate on it because I thought that this was a really interesting and revealing profile. We probably won't get another one for a very long time. So I'm going to eat my food and I need to digest it a little bit more and go through it in depth with my podcast co-host Madeline on the evolution of a snake. Go check that out. That will be up in the next few days or so. So if you want to continue the conversation, head over there. Until then, I will see you in my next video.